We have some major news about the next big step for Siri in iOS 27. iOS 26.4 launched this week, and there's even more that you didn't know about. WWDC 2026 has been confirmed. A major camera upgrade is coming for future iPhones, and much more. All in today's episode of Apple Weekly. Okay, so let's start with the big announcement this week, and that is that Apple officially announced the Worldwide Developers Conference 2026. So this is where Apple showcases their latest software, and this of course is going to be when we see iOS 27 Beta 1 gets released. Now, Apple announced this, and it's going to be on June 8th. This is going to be a big update. Of course, iOS 27 is going to have the smarter Siri, the chatbot Siri. It's also going to be a big update for bug fixes and stability, because it's supposed to be more like a snow leopard update like we saw from macOS back in the day, which really refines the OS and makes it really stable and smooth to use. Now, of course, that doesn't mean we're not going to get a ton of new features, because we are. You guys already know I'm going to bring you hundreds of new features here on the channel, but it is going to focus a lot on stability as well, and getting the device and the OS, prepared for the iPhone Fold as well. So apparently it's going to include optimizations for iPhone Fold. And a lot of you guys have been asking me this week, are we going to see new products at WWDC 2026? And I think there's actually a chance that we could, because there's still a lot of products that we have not seen yet. So we're talking about the Apple TV, the HomePod Mini, the Mac Mini, and the Mac Studio. So all of those have the potential to be released at this event. Now, as you guys know, Apple doesn't always announce hardware at the Worldwide Developers Conference, because it is mostly a software-based event, but sometimes they do, and we could see that again this year. But let's talk a bit more about iOS 27, because this week we also got a big report from Mark Gurman over at Bloomberg that details Siri is not only going to get big improvements like in the, Siri voice assistant, but we're also going to have a standalone Siri app and a new Ask Siri feature. So Gurman said that the updated Siri is designed to better control features within iPhone and Macs and tap into personal data like messages, notes, and emails to fulfill requests. It also will be able to complete tasks within apps, access news content, and search the open web using Apple-built interfaces and models. The most significant change is the ability to interact with users in a conversational chat-like format through text and voice. Now, all of that is kind of what we've heard before, not really too much new there. However, this next part is where it gets really interesting, because he says Apple is also testing a dedicated Siri app for the iPhone, iPad, and Mac later this year. The app's main interface will display prior conversations in either a list or a grid of rounded rectangles with text previews. Users can pin favorite chats, save older conversations, search across interactions, and start new chats via a prominent plus button. So it sounds a lot like ChatGPT, Gemini, like apps like that. So we may have a very similar interface to those applications where we can see our old chats, can go back into them and type into it and, continue that conversation, which is actually going to be really nice. And we're also going to see a redesign for Siri. So he says this: Apple is testing a redesigned interface that replaces the glowing edges effect introduced in iOS 18. So we just got that redesign, but it looks like it's going to be changing again, because he says one new design in testing places Siri at the top of the screen within the dynamic island. So we may no longer have the Siri glowing, around the whole screen. It might just be a more subtle little indicator in the dynamic island starting with iOS 27. But that's not the only thing that might be changing design-wise, because he also says that Apple is working to replace its existing on-device search system, Spotlight, with Siri. The new unified interface helps users find local content or submit broader queries in one place. So Spotlight might see a big change here as well. And then here is the interesting Ask Siri feature. So he says Apple is also testing the idea of integrating the assistant more deeply across its operating systems with new entry points. A system-wide Ask Siri toggle will appear in menus across built-in apps, allowing users to send selected content into a new Siri conversation. For example, they could request more information about highlighted text or pull up related emails. There's also a Write with Siri option at the top of the keyboard, which is in testing right now. This will surface the writing tools menu for generating and editing text. So it seems like there's going to be a lot of changes to Siri with iOS 27, a full standalone application, a completely different interface for when you actually, enable Siri, the Ask Siri feature. There's going to be a lot that's changed with Siri, and it's going to get even deeper as well with third-party integrations, because we got a a separate report this week that outlines that Apple is going to open up Siri to rival AI assistants with iOS 27. It's no longer going to be exclusive with ChatGPT like we have now. So the report says this: Apple plans to open Siri to outside artificial intelligence assistants. They're preparing to make the change as part of a Siri overhaul in iOS 27. The assistant can already tap into ChatGPT, but Apple will now allow competing services to do the same. Apple is developing new tools to allow AI chatbot apps installed via the App Store to integrate with Siri. That means, for instance, if users have Google Gemini or Claude installed, they'd be able to send queries to those services from within the Siri voice assistant, just like they've been able to with ChatGPT. The approach should also allow Apple to generate more money from third-party AI subscriptions through the App Store. And I think that right there is the key, because last week we talked about how Apple is quietly winning the AI wars, because at the end of the day, does anything really matter more than revenue and profits? In terms of a public company, Apple is killing it right now. They're more profitable than any of these other AI companies who are spending and kind of wasting, not really wasting, but they're not profitable with all these AI efforts. Meanwhile, Apple is doing the least amount of work on the surface, yet they're making the most profit from it. So that's key here again. Apple is going to be collecting that sweet, sweet passive income from people subscribing to these third-party AI services, but because they're doing it on Apple's platform, on Apple's devices, Apple's getting a cut. Now, Gurman does continue to say that the change is separate from Apple's work with Gemini to rebuild Siri using Gemini models. That arrangement is related to the underlying Apple technology for Siri. The extension system, meanwhile, would allow users to process requests via the actual Gemini service, assuming Google enables its app to do so. Now, that last part there is key, because in both of these reports, we did not see anything mentioned about the upcoming Google Gemini integration, because remember, we heard that it could be coming in iOS 26.5, but it doesn't appear to be the case because we've not seen anything about that. So at this point, I would not get your hopes up too high for that Google Gemini integration with iOS 26.5. Now, let's talk about some new products that might be coming pretty soon. And we're talking about the Apple TV and the HomePod and the HomePod Mini. So earlier I talked about how we might be seeing those at the Worldwide Developers Conference, but we might actually be seeing those sooner than that. And that's because Gurman said in a recent report that retail inventory of the full-sized HomePod, the HomePod Mini, and the Apple TV are running low at Apple retail stores around the world. Shortages more often than not mean that updated products are on the way. Now, he said that Apple has had fresh versions of at least the Apple TV and HomePod Mini ready since last year, but it's held off on releasing them because the company is waiting for the new Siri and other artificial intelligence upgrades. Those features are still nowhere near ready, so if the new hardware is indeed coming soon, it probably means Apple just got tired of waiting. He also says that the new iPad with the A18 chip is still on track to launch in the first half of this year. The big change to that is going to be a move from the A16 to the A18 chip, which means a faster device and one that supports Apple Intelligence. So like I've been saying for the past month, we are not going to see the new Apple TV or the new HomePods until that new version of Siri gets released, which again, according to Gurman, it's still a ways out. And if Apple does actually release it, it's going to be just because they were tired of waiting, and there's actually not going to be much changed, at launch, and we're going to see those changes come later after the product's already been out. But let's talk about a product that got completely discontinued this week, and that is the Mac Pro. So yes, Apple officially discontinued the Mac Pro with no plans to revitalize it in the future. So they confirmed this with 9to5Mac, and they're saying it's been removed from Apple's website as of Thursday afternoon, and the buy page on their site now redirects you to the Mac's homepage. So I think we all know that the Mac Studio was a big reason for the downfall of the Mac Pro, which I think that's good because the Mac Studio is much cheaper and you get crazy performance out of that Mac Studio. We should be seeing a new Mac Studio this year as well, hopefully at the Worldwide Developers Conference. Now let's talk about a big camera upgrade coming to the iPhone, not this year, but next year. And that is going to be a 200 megapixel sensor. And this news comes from Digital Chat Station over on Weibo, and he said that next year's iPhone could have a 200 megapixel 1/1.2 inch sensor, similar to the one rumored for Oppo's upcoming Find X9 Ultra. So of course, like I always say, megapixels don't always tell the full story. Just because you have a lot of megapixels doesn't necessarily mean it's going to produce the best image. But I think with Apple, with all the stuff going on internally as well and all their algorithms software wise, if we get a 200 megapixel lens, that's going to be pretty crazy. And that's going to be a pretty big leap for Apple, because as of right now, the most we have is 48 megapixels. Now, here's something that upset a lot of people this week. So Apple officially announced that ads are coming to the Apple Maps application. So Apple officially announced that ads are coming to the Apple Maps application on the iPhone and iPad in the US and Canada starting this summer. So Apple says that businesses in the US and Canada will be able to place ads in search results and at the top of a new suggested places section in the app. And in the press release, it says this: ads on Maps will appear when users search in Maps and can appear at the top of a user's search results based on relevance, as well as at the top of a new suggested places experience in Maps, which will display recommendations based on what's trending nearby, the user's recent searches, and more. And they do finish this off by saying that Maps with ads is just as private as Maps without ads. Where you go and the ads you see and interact with are not associated with your Apple account. Personal data stays on your device, is not collected or stored by Apple Ads, and is not shared with third parties. And I think that part is key because a lot of people are getting upset over this because of the scare about their data and everything like that, which I don't know why, because we know Apple, that's never been the case. So, ads, it's not going to be like big takeover ads where you have to press an X on it. So I don't really see a huge issue with this. I know probably people are going to hate me in the comments for that, but it's going to be pretty inconspicuous from what it seems, at least. So we'll have to wait and see. We'll have to revisit it when it actually comes out, but for right now, it seems like it's not going to be a massive deal, in my opinion. Okay, so let's move on over to our iPhone, and let's start with the Apple Sports application, because this week we also saw a nice update to Apple Sports with some changes here. So it says MLB fans can now see the probable starting pitcher for each game. Car numbers have been added to NASCAR leaderboards, and you can now disable sports betting odds in the application. If we go into our settings here, you can see show betting odds. You can turn that off completely now, which is nice. Also this week, we saw AirDrop roll out to the Samsung Galaxy S26 series, and it actually works really well. So if you have a Samsung Galaxy S26, S26 Plus, or S26 Ultra, it's now natively built in. So you do have to go into the quick share settings, but I've actually used this and it works surprisingly well. And it's nice that now we don't need a third-party application to transfer a photo or transfer something over to somebody on Android. Now, also this week, we saw Apple post a teaser trailer for the upcoming Widow's Bay series. So this is a new kind of horror thriller series, and you can see it's coming on April 29th. And if you take a look at what this is about, it says the mayor of a New England town resolves to turn it into the next tourist hotspot despite local warnings that it's cursed. So this seems interesting, and of course Apple always kills it with their Apple TV series, so I cannot wait to see what this is all about, but we did see a little teaser this week. And speaking of shows, we just saw this week that Netflix raised their prices again. So if you have a Netflix subscription, just know that they raised prices across all tiers. So the ad plan is now $9 a month, the standard plan is $20 a month, and premium is $27 a month. Now, in a statement to Variety, Netflix said that it's updating its pricing because it delivers more value than ever to customers. Now, keep in mind, Netflix Premium is now the most expensive standalone streaming service subscription out of all of them at $27 a month. So yeah, just know if you see your bill go up more next month, it's not just you. Netflix did raise their prices. But let's talk about iOS 26.4, because this week we did see the official launch of iOS 26.4. We did have a slightly different build number than what we had on the RC, which was interesting to see. And yeah, so this update was obviously a very large update, more than 50 new features and changes. If you missed my What's New video, I will leave it linked down below. But of course, the big ones are the new emojis, the big changes to Apple Music, the keyboard bug fix was a massive one. But something else happened with iOS 26.4, and that is that you now have age verification in the UK. And this has been a nightmare from what I've heard. Obviously, I'm in the US, so I've not experienced this firsthand, but a lot of people in the UK are having major issues with verifying their age and their identity because of iOS 26.4. There's actually a whole Reddit thread on this, and you can see that according to these users, it attempts to verify your age using Apple Wallet, but since it only accepts credit cards, not debit cards, you're forced to manually enter your details or use an ID like a driver's license or passport, yet scanning requires perfect conditions. So you have to have like no shadows or anything, and it just fails. Like it fails constantly when you try to scan it, making the whole process really frustrating and time consuming and surprisingly un-Apple-like. So that's been the experience for a lot of people out in the UK. So if you are in the UK okay? Please tell me about your experience with this whole age verification thing going on. Now, also with iOS 26.4, we saw some security patches. Now, thankfully, none of them were being actively exploited, so none of these bugs were being actively exploited out there in the wild. However, as you can see here, there are quite a few that have been patched with this update, and like I always say, that is one of the biggest reasons to always keep your device as up to date as possible. Even if they're not always being actively exploited, it's always a good idea to just keep your device as secure as possible, and you get to that point by updating the software. And speaking of security, we also saw an interesting kind of hidden feature added to macOS Tahoe 26.4, and this has to do with the terminal. So there's a new security feature that warns you if you paste certain commands into the terminal app that may be harmful, and you'll get a pop-up that says possible malware paste blocked. So it won't allow you to paste that in because it thinks you could be pasting in malware into the terminal app. And then with tvOS 26.4, I didn't really cover tvOS 26.4 too much, but there is one interesting change I wanted to point out, and that is that Apple added a new Genius Browse section to the Apple TV app on tvOS 26.4. So this is basically a content discovery feature that provides recommendations for TV shows and movies across multiple suggested categories. So it could be a good way to find something new to watch. Now, as far as the performance and the battery life goes on iOS 26.4, I think it is rock solid. I've really had no issues at all with performance or with battery life. I don't want to spend too long here because I already covered this in the What's New video and in the RC video, so I'm not going to waste your time by saying the same thing over and over again. But yeah, no issues with performance, no issues with battery life, and after reading all the comments on my 26.4, What's New video, it seems like a lot of you guys had your battery drain issues resolved as well. So if you did have battery drain or any type of weird issue with battery or performance, it seems like those were resolved with this update, which is a great sign. Now, if you have a different experience, by all means, let me know in a comment down below. I'm really curious to see, but for me, nothing to complain about. Now let's talk about what to expect next from Apple, because next up is going to be iOS 26.5 Beta 1. Now, of course, we're not going to see the official 26.5 update until much later, maybe even into May, but we are going to see 26.5 Beta 1 most likely next week. Now, like I said, probably on the 30th or the 31st is when I can see us getting 26.5 Beta 1, by the way. Now, like I mentioned earlier, I would not get your hopes up for this. I know for a while we've talked about the Google Gemini, Siri coming in 26.5, but again, we've not really seen any talk about that recently. Gurman has kind of stopped talking about it completely, and maybe it was never a Gemini integration to begin with. So it's just kind of confusing at this point, and I would just say to not get your hopes too high for any type of Google Gemini and Siri integration in 26.5. Could it come? Possibly. Could we see the remnants of it, the beginning of it? Possibly. I'm just saying, don't get your hopes up too high because the talk about it has kind of completely fallen off a cliff. So yeah, 26.5 Beta 1 could be a relatively minor update. Usually the 0.5 updates are really nothing to write home about. So yeah, but I think at this point, all eyes are going to be on iOS 27, which as we know now, June 8th, that Monday, June 8th, is when we will see WWDC 2026 kickoff, and that's when we will see iOS 27 Beta 1 with the new Siri app, the whole new Siri interface. Everything's going to change with Siri in iOS 27, and I think it's going to be a massive deal. And by the way, I just did a full 10-minute screen recording on my 17 Pro Max here, and I only went down by 1%. So I talked earlier about how battery life was great. I think that's another good testament to how great it is, because as you guys know, screen recording also drains battery pretty quickly, especially when I'm already low like this. So good sign for battery again. Anyways, let's finish off with another crazy AirTag story. So nothing's going to touch the crazy AirTag story from last week. So if you missed last week's crazy AirTag story, please go back and watch it. That one was one of the most insane we've ever done here on the channel, especially with the video that came with it. But anyways, this time a woman in Florida started noticing something seriously off after breaking up with her boyfriend of 3 years, who is a 65-year-old part-time prisoner transport deputy. She said that even before the breakup, she had already found AirTags hidden in her car and in her adult daughter's car dating back to 2025, which is already insane. But things escalated after they split up last month. Not only did she find another AirTag on her car, but she also checked her home security footage and saw him crawling underneath her daughter's vehicle, placing one in her vehicle. And it didn't stop there, because she told investigators that he kept showing up wherever she was multiple times, even pulling up in his official sheriff's office vehicle. So at that point, she went to the sheriff's office to give a full statement to detectives, but while she was literally there talking to police, he shows up again right in the parking lot and even parks behind her car. So at that point, deputies step in, investigate the vehicles, and sure enough, they find AirTags on both her and her daughter's cars. So when they confront the man, he actually admits to placing the AirTags on their cars, but he claims that he wasn't following her, which doesn't really make any sense at all. So of course, that same night, he was arrested and charged with stalking and unlawfully installing tracking devices, and he's currently being held without bond. And then just like that, after more than a decade on the job, he was suspended, then fired the very next day. And honestly, without those AirTags and without her being brave enough to go to the police, because sometimes these people can be really dangerous, who knows how long this would have gone on or what could have actually come from all this stalking. So crazy stuff out there. Anyways, guys, that's it for this week's episode. I hope you guys did enjoy it. If you did, let me know in a comment down below. And of course, give it a thumbs up as well if you did. Appreciate it. But anyways, guys, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you soon.